Cool. Um, Now, Drew, am I correct? You're from Morgan County, right?
That is correct.
Wonderful. I have never ventured to those parts, but I've spent a fair deal of time in Roane County, which I think is right next to there, if I
It
recall.
is. It is southeastern from us, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good place, interesting place. An old boss I used to work for is from there. And we had to do something in Knoxville for a weekend, so we stopped by there in Rockwood.
Yeah,
And
they were in our, region or district or whatever.
yeah, it's an interesting place. Really, really interesting.
Well, Roane
Um,
County and Morgan County are very close. They are a little different because the interstate goes right through Roane County, and we don't have any of that in Morgan County.
yeah, I remember him saying something about that because there was a socioeconomic divide between the two a little bit, I think, and that may have been part of the reason.
It's that, and it is a big part of it because commuters, like people with the good jobs there in Knoxville or even Oak Ridge, which is in Anderson County and is right there, they'll buy homes and whatnot in Roane County, and that ups it. Whereas Sunbright, we get very few. The only people we get moving in are people who want to join cults and people who have like real off the grid racism, like the people who want a lot of land and it's cheap and they don't need any of the things most people need. That seems to be the only newbies we get.
Who you're talking about?
Man, I don't even know. There's this dome out there in Shake Rag where me and my friend Gene was riding motorcycles when we were little, and we saw them gathered around. At first, I thought it was the Klan. It was like a bunch of people wearing white, and I was like, I had never seen the Klan. This is wild. And we didn't want to get too close. We were hiding in the woods, and it turns out it was some kind of weird group. Anyway, we told our parents, and they were freaking out, and they were like, that's this group. Dude, I'm almost certain it was absolutely just some harmless. I mean, look, this is something we get in the rural parts of America. Like the hippie farms the hippie farm commune is in Tennessee. That one's harmless. I don't think it's a cult necessarily, but I'm just saying that we get to those groups where the land's cheap. They can go there and nobody will bother them. I don't think there was anything gnarly going on. Out on the Genesis Road, one time there was a group that supposedly got busted by the TBI for having people kidnapped. But that's the gnarliest. Well, man, what an opening to an interview.
That's what I was hoping for. Yeah, the hippie commune. I've actually heard a little bit about that. There's also God, what was it? There was some other, like, I don't know, it may have been some like a swinger resort or something that someone I used to work with told me about. I'm not sure how they knew a lot about it, but
yeah, sure, Chuck. However, you got to bury your yeah, 7 degrees from some dude fucking your wife. Yeah. But can I cuss?
Well, part of the fetish is confessing about it without confessing. So
you nailed it. Somebody just came. I've not heard that one. There's a guy on TikTok who's like I've seen on my page a lot because I follow like rural leftists. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you know how that app works. It's for kids. I'm aware of that, but I have to put myself on social media. Anyway, there's some kind of new commune in Lafayette, Tennessee, which is close to where Trey, one of the guys, Lafayette, for those of you who like.
Oh, Lafayette. Yeah. Okay, I've heard it pronounced 4 different ways. What county is that in? Do you know?
That's close to Clay. I don't think it's in Clay, but it might be.
Okay. Okay.
It's either right past the edge of Appalachia or right on it.
Yeah. Because Trey's from Salina, right?
He is.
Okay. All right.
And we've talked about this before, he and I, according to most maps, my county's just east of his. He and I live on the westernmost edge of Appalachia. Him quite literally, according to most maps. So we joke about how, like, even in the middle of nowhere, we're the middle of nowhere. Like, people from the sticks are like, Clay County?
Yeah.
Where the lake is? I've been there once.
That's like, it's funny, that's like the opposite of my experience and probably John's too, in the sense is like we always felt like we were from nowhere, but Parkersburg is like a bustling metropolis like compared to Sunbright. And so we'd go to when I went to Morgantown for my first year of college at WVU, I met somebody from God, what was it? It was like Lost Creek or somewhere in West Virginia. Yeah. It was not a census designated area. Like it would be like non-com or something like that. And they're like, oh my God, you're from the city. You've got Grand Central Mall, I was like, yeah, is that a landmark for y'all? Okay, cool.
The first time I went to Salina with Trey, he hates this bit, and I continued to do the bit all day. Like, we rolled into town, and I saw a Subway sandwich shop, not a train. But we saw this. I was like, Subway, huh? Okay, next you're gonna tell me you have a Walmart, and he was like, yeah, we got a Walmart. What are you talking about? And I'm like, whoa, we got a Walmart. So for the rest of the day, like, his sister Paige was like, y'all want anything from the Dairy Queen? And I was like, Dairy Queen? Y'all got we got a Dairy Queen. So I'm from nowhere.
Oh, yeah. God. You mentioned Paige. I listened to your all's recent episode on WellRED. She's fucking funny.
Buddy, she's the funniest person I know.
She is. That whole story about her being in Claire's was just ridiculous. I loved it. But I think that's a good bridge. One of the reasons that we all wanted to have you on here is because we're a big fan of you and your comedy work that you do and the WellRED trio. In fact, I actually had tickets to your show in DC that was supposed to be last April. Unfortunately, this thing called a global pandemic happened, but I'm kind of wondering, how are you all dealing with that? How are you dealing with that? I know obviously like John and I kind of have seen some of the stuff you've been putting online, but what's that like for you?
It's been a bit of a head trip. So for anyone who doesn't know, I tour with two of the guys, Corey Forrester and Trey Crowder. Up until pretty recently, Trey was by far the one who had garnered the most attention or gone the most viral or the most famous or however you want to say it. Corey recently blew up too. So it's just me now. But I didn't mean to open with that. I'm just
strong start.
When we talk about WellRED, there's a trio of us. We tour together, we write together, we've made sketches together. We have been writing partners in some capacity for almost 8 years.
Damn.
We tour, and when we tour, we do stand up, separate, like classic stand up. So we have our own jokes and our own style. I think for them, from talking to them, it almost felt like a breather. They're both very over it now, and they're ready to get back out there. I think for them, it felt like a breather. I think that when it comes to like mental health, they kind of tend more towards depression, and they like really welcome the breather. I tend more towards anxiety. Mm-hmm. And for me, man, I was crawling up the walls. It was like a total reset for me. I was used to in and out, traveling all the time, being in a new city, writing new jokes, go. It was a nice, refreshing thing to pause for a couple weeks. And then I just started crawling up the walls. And then you just referenced some of the stuff I've been putting out. Man, I really didn't like online content in general. I feel like the requirement to be topical has made everything, especially in my world, the comedy world, worse. I really love jokes. I really love deeply funny things, but I have grown to accept and try to move into that more topical world and just realize this is where we're at, and it can be frustrating because you have an idea and you want to pull it off, and then you feel like it's irrelevant because you get on the internet and all anyone wants to talk about is the politics of the day or the Super Bowl coming up. But lately, through the help of my wife, honestly, who you guys have had on, Andi Morrow, great filmmaker and writer and actor, I've just been working on being more positive, fellas. just trying to look at things the positive way. And it's weird how that can like change your DNA. Like, I think I started getting funnier. It was like, it sounds like I'm quoting like a self-help book or something, but as soon as I just was like, okay, we're in a fucking quarantine. Like, it is what it is. No one's coming to save us. And if I want to do funny stuff, it's got to be on the internet. So I got to play by the internet's rules.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's something that I imagine it's super frustrating for you because, and listeners will know if they listen to the last episode, we used your stand-up bit about accents in our intro. Your stuff is really funny, and it's really, I think, very topical to where you grew up a lot of times. And, accents, they're not something that's trending on Twitter. So it's like, how do you actually get that real well thought out, funny shit out there? And it's probably, I can imagine it's extremely frustrating because the topics of the day, especially on social media, are often not really what a lot of people are generally talking about, and a lot of it tends to be negative, which is weird. I don't know where I'm really going with this, but it's good to hear that like your perspective changes helped you. I know we talk about mental health on this show, not a lot, I would say, but probably more so recently because John and I have both had our own experiences with it, and it's got to be like extremely hard for someone who's used to being out in front of people. And I'm sure like the energy that you get being on stage, like hearing people laugh at the stuff that you do is something that probably fuels you. So like not having that and like that replacement is a like or a retweet, it's got to be difficult. But I mean, I guess like I'm not trying to like toot your own horn here for you, but your stuff is really, really good. And I think it's really, I think it is timely too. Like your bit with Diamond Drew Morgan is something that John and I both appreciate as people who have, I wouldn't say exited the law profession because neither of us actually went into it, but we appreciate the humor behind it. I want to kind of get a sense of like backing up a little bit how you got started in comedy, because I think I alluded to it a little bit, but you were a public defender before that, which is probably the least funny career, I guess, that you could have.
Thank you for recognizing that fact. Everyone always asks me why I don't talk more about it on stage. And I have a couple jokes and stories, but it's like, because it's bleak.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do it. I don't know a lot about the metropolis you guys hail from, but you might identify with this. You know, like my Uncle Rodney drove Jeff Foxworthy's tapes over to the house like the day after he got them and was like, y'all got to listen to this. I, late at night, snuck up and heard my mom and Aunt Lisa laughing at Eddie Murphy. And no one said those words in my house, and no one was allowed to. And no one was allowed to watch movies with those words in them. So the fact that he was getting away with it and they were laughing, like, this mesmerized me, and I fall in love with jokes. But I didn't know a lawyer, guys. So, like, knowing a comedian, like, seeing comedians as a field or like a thing you could do, that was so alien to my brain and my experience. You know, like the only lawyer I knew of was a judge. I probably didn't even know judges were lawyers at the time. And his wife was the lady who worked the front desk at my school. So that's the lady that, you know, calls your mom when you're sick, or you told your history teacher he was a fucking idiot. Like, that's my, like, that dude, that lady's husband was a lawyer. That was it. So law school seemed like a huge dream to me. I mean, and it was. I'm not downplaying it. But my point with that is I always wanted to do comedy. It just didn't seem like what a teacher and preacher's kid from Sunbright did. It felt like what people who grew up in New York did. It might, like when I watched stand-up, to me, I didn't have this thought consciously, but I may as well have been watching French mimes. Like,
right.
I wasn't going to do that. You know, and then I moved to Boston for law school. I moved to Miami, my first job out of law school. And it's like, obviously I'm older now. And at some point I realized, oh, like that was a lie you told yourself because you're scared. Go do it now or never. Andy signed me up for a contest and I came in second, which was, I think, foreshadowing for a lot of my career. And I was hooked.
That's awesome. That's interesting. You referenced Jeff Foxworthy. I know the tapes because my parents had a shelf with the cassettes of all, like, I think at that time it was like 95. So every Jeff Foxworthy album that had come out up to that point, with Alan Jackson and then unfortunately Bill Cosby next to it. Which Bill Cosby his shit was funny. I'm not going to pretend like it wasn't.
No,
and
right.
Like it honestly, like listening to the comedy tapes actually, when I was stressed out when I was like a kid, would actually give me comfort because it was like spoken word, but it was the only spoken word we had in our house. So it was kind of weird because you get comfort from you might be a redneck if jokes, but I mean whatever works as a kid.
No, I think we've been taught to be ashamed of Jeff Foxworthy because he plays into the goofiest parts of our culture that other people have stereotyped. But that's like he's one of ours. So like it went so far and it got so famous and it became a parody of itself. But the first time any of us heard him talking about, you know, if your granny has a TV on top of an older, unworking TV. It's like, oh shit, he's talking about all of us. He's talking about all our mamas. So, I think he gets a bad rap. I understand it's a hokey joke, but when he wrote it, I don't think he thought this is my whole identity as a comedian. Because Jeff Foxworthy has this joke about fishing in the ice in an ice water, like ice fishing,
Mm-hmm.
and about how that has to be like a fish dying and going to heaven and seeing God and all his ancestors on the wall, and God was wearing a Budweiser. Like, the dude's deep when he wants to be. So anyway, I get real I get my back up when it comes to Jeff Foxworthy.
Yeah, and I wasn't throwing shade at him. I love Jeff Foxworthy. I think he's brilliant. And his stuff, I do think he gets kind of a bad rap because I think people associate it a lot with the stereotypes. But there's also, when you said that joke about your grandma having a TV on top of one that wasn't working, I was literally like sitting here imagining my grandparents' house in Vienna, West Virginia, where they had that exact same thing. So,
right.
Yeah.
One thing I've always wondered, we kind of alluded to one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, so obviously you have like Jeff Foxworthy, you have like Larry the Cable Guy, who have kind of been put into this, I don't know, a country centric type comedy. I don't know how you would describe it. Are you ever, I know some comedians are worried about getting put into that group. Are you ever worried about getting put into that group, or is that something that you want to happen? Not, you don't want to happen. I've always kind of wondered your take on that.
Yeah. Oh man. In some ways, the answer to this explains why I'm sitting here on this podcast discussing comedy in the first place. When Trey and Corey and I and another guy, DJ Lewis, and other people too, were around at the time, were first attracted to each other when we first started doing comedy, we had observed, and this, what I'm about to say is true because of what you just said. We had observed that it sure seemed like comedians from where we were from were in that genre, or they did like what David Cross did. David Cross is from a small town outside of Atlanta. But he has a whole album dedicated to hating on Larry the Cable Guy. The whole album's not, but the title of it is, I think it's called Fuck Larry the Cable Guy or Death to the Cable Guy.
Yeah.
I understood his sentiment, especially finding out Larry was from Nebraska and as a young comic, being expected to sort of act that way. But anyway, we sort of set out pretty purposefully, John, when we were young comedians, to do neither of those things. We were like, we will not play down this accent. We will lean into it if it makes a joke funnier. We will say mama instead of grandmother, even if we're in Connecticut, because that's how we talk and it's funnier. But we will not build entire jokes around farting like a duck call. And the reason I remembered that joke is it's funny. That's a Larry the Cable Guy joke and it's a funny fucking joke. But it was told by a guy who's wearing hillbilly blackface, frankly, and we wanted to do and be more than that. So we were obsessed with that question, John. It rippled through everything we did. For me, I should speak for me. It rippled through everything I did and didn't do as a young comedian. Now, honestly, and maybe this is just like the old dog who just like wants more bones, put me in a category. Like, does it sell? And do I have fans who, I will say this, do I have fans who at the very least know that I'm a full, complete human being, not just, one little thing here or there, Because you're going to get pigeonholed for whatever you break as. If you guys are familiar with a guy by the name of Bert Kreischer is far from political. If you asked anybody, no one would say he's pigeonholed in any way, but that's not really true. His first story that went viral was about being the machine, a party animal. Well, he's talked to us on our podcast about how people expect him to drink with him every single night. And he's not mad about it because it's like his fans, and they think it would make him happy. But you do worry about that. Anyway, my long-winded answer is, I think about that shit all the time. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of let go of it because the fact of the matter is, comedy is borderline genreless because you filter your worldview through yourself. You are kind of, you don't have music, you don't have the movie and the story and all that. It's just you. So, since we don't have genres, we have stereotypes, and people get put into them. it's going to happen. You know, my take on that now that I'm older is put me on an all Southern lineup. I'll be different because I'm not just that. Put me on a lineup in New York as the token Southerner, and I'll be different because I kind of am that. It's fine with me now.
I think that's a good perspective. I mean, first off, you mentioned Burt. I love his story about realizing that he's the story behind Van Wilder. Have you heard that? That's
Yeah.
I love how he talks about that. But anyway, I don't want to go off topic. But I think that that's a really interesting perspective because I mean, at times, like even with this podcast, like I always worry. I'm like, I don't want to get too regional. Our whole goal is like we want to make a bigger podcast so people learn more about the region. Like that's the goal here. And I always kind of look at that and see. And it's interesting you mentioned comedy doesn't have any genres because you're right. I mean, obviously, but I've noticed that people are trying to create genres in comedy. That seems to be the new. You have like the Kevin Harts of the world who are really trying to create a genre. I don't know what I would consider it, but he has his own kind of place on the mantle right now. And then you have people who want to just put comedians into certain boxes. But I did just want to know in terms of that, your take on it.
Well, the best way I can explain it, are you guys familiar with Earthquake? Considered an urban comic, a black comedian off BET from big in the 90s.
I'm not, no.
Well, he was big then. He's been in some stuff, but I would say that he's the same genre he would be if we had him as Larry the Cable Guy.
Okay.
But because they speak to very different groups of people, at the same time, they're very much not. And then you look at that and you compare it to music. A lot of music heads will tell you that R&B and country have become the same freaking music, just with different accents and a little bit different instruments. But when you look at the structure and the way the music is made, they're very similar. So I'm not bringing all that to get into some deep race analysis. It's just more that you're right. They're trying to. And the thing about that is you can rail against it as a comedian, which I did for a long time, or you can just try to kind of control it and be like, well, don't let them tell you what you are because they're going to. So you go tell them what you are.
Yeah, that is.
And that would be my advice to y'all as a podcast. If you do grow, people will tell you what you are. You might as well be telling them what you are.
Strong advice. Did you find that sort of difficult? Because, the thing that I recall when I first discovered you and when I first discovered Trey was that the three of you were couched together, number one, but also couched as like, this is the response to Southern comedy and Southerners that are conservative. This is the response to that. Like it was already made up into a damn YouTube video in and of itself. Did you feel like you needed to break away from something like that?
Again, I still do. And I still wonder why even try, because it's going to happen, And some of that's, I won't say our fault. We were a little naive, I guess. Like we wrote the book. So we've got the book, the Liberal Redneck Manifesto. There's a whole chapter on redneck, hillbilly, crack, all these terms and the history of them and our relationship to them. And so we talk about Foxworthy. And, we kind of called out Larry the Cable Guy. And when you do that, and we kind of called out a couple of people, but when you do that, you are going to get pigeonholed, as you say, as some sort of response. And then also I have to say, I just talked to you guys about how when we were young comedians, I could tell you stories of bookers. I mean, one booker fired me and Trey with the same email. I could tell you stories of bookers being like, you don't ever talk about Jesus again on my stage, and listen, take my advice. Like, you need to understand you're not going to have a career if you do that. So we were a response to that, consciously or unconsciously. But we think Jeff Foxworthy's brilliant. Larry the Cable Guy's hilarious. That's why it worked. I think Ron White is sincerely a personal comedy hero of mine, even if his politics or his fans would never fuck with me because of my politics, So it's both, Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned the booker and how like they basically said you can't mention this or that on our stage again. It reminds me of the conversation we had with a lot of listeners when we did our accents episode last week, where we heard from John. I can't even count how many people who said that they either suppressed their accent or had to change it or hide it or do something with it. And many of them lost it because they felt like they wouldn't, they were not getting looked at for like professional opportunities, or they were being looked down upon. So it sounds like that was almost a similar situation with that, which is a shame. But I think it's admirable that you all push back against that, because it's something that I think we have tried to encourage more people to do, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard when you're being met with like headwinds that are saying don't do this. One thing
I think. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think comedy lends itself to that, because I definitely caught myself doing that in my professional life. And comedy was a place where it was like, even if the booker's telling you to stop doing this, and that does scare you, when you look to your heroes and you read their interviews, they're saying you got to be yourself and you got to push against this bullshit, you know? So I think that's one reason I was attracted to comedy.
Yeah. Before we transition real quick, the only other question I wanted to ask you was, obviously, let's peg you right now as like a Southern comedian, right? Like, that's obviously like what some people peg you as, and you all coming from where you come from. What was the initial response that y'all got whenever you started doing this? Like, obviously your politics at the time, especially, 8 years ago or whatever, didn't line up with everywhere that you were going. What was the response on that? How did people, maybe even in your own community, look at your comedy?
Yeah, for sure. To answer that question, I'd have to break it down by groups. My own community mostly reacted with, "You ain't a redneck." And in that community, that is true. In our book, we discussed this, and we were open about it on interviews. That's a word that got through at me in law school, even by my friends who I adore, but who got to know me, and it was like I was different than them, and we were all drinking and whatever, we're young idiots in law school, and then I throw a snowball at a cop car and scream "fuck the police" in my accent, and now they're like, "Oh, he's a redneck." But then the guy who I grew up with, who had to work all that damn day, if I called him that night and told him that story, he would be like, "So let me get this straight. You're in Boston drinking at a pub, and law school. You're a redneck? Okay, buddy." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Right.
The reaction from our hometowns was a lot of that, and mostly, I think, curiosity at first. I will say about small communities, they like it when you make it, even if they don't like what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, over time, they can get over that and the goodwill can go away. At our shows, I would say it was a lot of thank you. Oh my God, I can't believe, I feel like I'm a closet liberal in my hometown. And a big part of our mission starting out was kind of saying to people, hey, be louder, be more open. There's more of you than you realize. Fox News and the PTA meeting has you convinced that you're not allowed to be you in your hometown, but that ain't true. Look around. Look how many people's in this room right now. And then outside of the South, it was very much, you're a unicorn. And we had to fight that. We had to say, we're not unicorns,
Yeah, that's, I don't know about you, John. That sounds like a familiar way that at least I've been treated when I first left West Virginia. Is people, I moved up to Michigan for law school, and they were like, "Oh my God, like you have left leaning views and you're from West Virginia. Like, how is that possible?" And it's like, well, because people are fucking complex, and so
also,
are states.
And also, let me give you a history lesson on the mines and the unions and the entire history of organizing in the South, specifically the Appalachian region. Shout out the Highland Center.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Yeah. And that's a big thing that we've talked about on this show is the importance of unions, and how really, I mean, the like what you would consider, I guess, a leftist uprising almost originated in West Virginia with the Battle of Blair Mountain. And I vaguely recall, because I read the Liberal Redneck Manifesto a while ago. Wasn't your dad a union railroad worker or something? Like he's a priest, right? But he's also
he's a preacher.
Excuse me.
We ain't got no Catholics where I'm from. Not that I'm against Catholics. We just don't have any. Kind of like money. We wish we had some. Dad is a evangelical Baptist preacher, like independent missionary, whatever, and is retired from the railroad. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And he was always a union man, and he always voted Democrat, at least nationally. And being a pretty, by most people's standards, fundamentalist Christian, the Democratic platform didn't line up with him a lot, but it lined up, he felt like, with his pocketbook. And his sort of take on it was, George Bush, born in Connecticut, moved to Texas, suddenly became Southern, is super rich from oil money. This guy tells me he's against abortion. I'm against abortion too, but he ain't never done nothing for abortion. Whereas being a union man, he always leaned left. I think my dad's struggled lately with that. He hated Donald Trump, but I think he feels like the Democratic Party on the national level has sort of been, kind of what's the words I'm looking for? Given lip service to worrying about the working man and not taking care of him. So, and I've been screaming this at the Democratic Party the whole time I've been in it. And to be frank with you guys, I feel like I left it in the last 4 or 5 years. I think I've gone too far left myself to be considered a Democrat. But I have been telling the Democrats nationally, and this was a part, I guess, of our mission too in general. Not that we set out to change the world or anything, but it's like when you say, "Oh, you guys are unicorns. There's no one from your town like you," that affects policy, that affects how people spend money, and then that affects outcomes.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point that I don't know how much you want to talk about politics, but my dad was also a union guy, and so that's where a lot of my political background and foundation comes from, and I think that's probably the reason that my family was Democrats. But I think you're right, and one of the things that the Democrats have really lost is their grip on that type of person and that type of lifestyle. You have a lot of, I hate to use the word elitism and elitist because I feel like it gets thrown around a lot, but it really is. I mean, the perfect example in the state you're in right now, Governor Gavin Newsom going to a really fancy French restaurant or whatever the hell it was and violating his own rules. And so it kind of just shows you that it just because you have a D next to your name doesn't mean that you're for the working people. And It's something that I think John and I have really tried to push on this show because, we are Democrats in the sense that that's how we vote. And John ran as a Democrat, but we haven't been, we certainly haven't been ignorant to the fact that a lot of them have not represented that. And that was the base of the Democratic Party for a long time. Hell, was the base of the Tennessee Democrats for a long time. And they had a grip on that state forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would be fair if anybody's listening going, well, racism had something to do with it. I think that's fair. And then I think the Fox News machine and the terrestrial radio machine and now the podcast machine and the YouTube machine weaponizes the things you're talking about. If Gavin Newsom eats at a fancy French restaurant, that becomes a bigger deal than whatever Mitch McConnell did that week. And I don't know why that is. It frustrates me. If I was from Eastern Kentucky, I'd give a lot more of a damn about what Mitch McConnell was doing than I would Gavin Newsom. Mm-hmm. But facts are facts. Gavin Newsom did do a stupid thing. I'm from his state. He can go fuck himself in a French restaurant. But, you've got to give credit or blame. You got to place blame on the ability of the Republican machine to weaponize a lot of these things and weaponize racism and racial fears. But a lot of it is, it is on the Dems. And as far as you said, you don't know how much we can talk about politics for another hour, or I would be super happy to talk about comedy, honestly, one way or the other, though.
Yeah, we talk ad nauseum about politics, so talking about comedy makes me feel a little better, especially right now.
All right, well, here's a transition for you. We'll talk about both briefly, and then we'll go back to comedy. Here's how we're talking about both. I have a new character called Drew Dollars, and the whole thing is me trying to sort of satirize or parody our obsession with the stock market and money and it being made up. And I came up with this before the GameStop thing and before Doge stock or whatever the fuck it's called blew up.
Yeah.
But that was a perfect thing. But anyway, my newest bit, and I'm trying to keep this going, I want to buy Joe Manchin. And I really do. like it's funny and it is a joke, and we're not going to meet the goal. And if we don't meet the goal, I'm going to give all the money to a West Virginia food bank. But if you follow me at Drew Moore Comedy, you'll see some of the videos and some of the bits I'm doing. I have a GoFundMe. Joe Manchin has taken about just under $1 million in his campaign from Wall Street, Securities Exchange, that whole lobby. If they can for $1 million over 5 years get all the laws he's passed in their favor, surely we can get one law passed in our favor for like $200,000. I think that for $200,000, we can get Joe Manchin to give us $2,000 checks a month, at least until September. So what I'm pitching to you guys and what I'm pitching to your listeners right now is go to my GoFundMe, donate, and if we raise $200,000, we're going to just buy Joe Manchin. We'll just buy a vote from him. And I don't know if it's legal. I mean, it's not, but like everybody else gets away with it. Let's stop complaining about politicians being for sale and just fucking buy one.
They can't be for sale if they've been sold. And you know what? Fuck it. Enough money can change the fucking law. I was going to clarify that sometimes I tend to jump around in interviews, and it's because of my ADHD, and I'm 100% blaming it on that. I do agree with your goal of buying Joe Manchin. I support it. John, I know that you've interacted with Chairman Joe, and so why don't you give your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, when I ran for office, full disclosure, Joe Manchin donated money to my campaign. He got people to donate money to my campaign. Obviously, I was the same party as him. I don't know why you're laughing.
Well, I'm just remembering. I'm remembering that when he approached you because he wanted John to endorse him.
Oh,
and we collectively made the decision no. Not to, because it would have hurt John politically.
Yeah. So that was the thing. And he helped, give me some money, which was very nice of him. But, I always think I was always very transparent. Like I would post things like somebody donated this money to me today. Somebody donated. And I always like the comedy bit that talks about how politicians should wear NASCAR suits that have all their sponsors on it because then you know who bought them. And I think that's great. And what we should do is try to raise like $205,000 because I'm assuming like a fireproof suit, maybe $5,000, and we get that made for Joe Manchin to wear as he's walking, the halls of Congress. It's just got, it's got Drew Morgan Comedy on the front. A bunch of different things. I mean,
I'm for the people. We'll put me on the back.
Okay, that's fine.
Like right up front.
Why don't we put you on the booty?
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
There we go. Are you ever going to run again, John? We can put you on the front.
Hey, we never know.
Put your face on it, but have it be the face from our logo with you and the Coons.
Yeah,
that'd be beautiful.
Yeah, I think this is all starting to come together. This is, I guess, a good transition too, because a lot of the times comedians, especially you, I've watched some of your, I guess, more recent stuff that you post. You post a lot. You tend, like most comedians, to have a real, true underlying meaning to your comedy. Like you're being funny, but there are points to your comedy. It's not just like rolling, whatever you want, but there are points to it. How do you, like with causes, maybe even like the Joe Manchin thing, right? Like, how do you get on that, comedy side of things, but also to be taken seriously? How do you tiptoe that line?
I don't know. As I said in the beginning of the interview, I'm the least famous person on my tour. It's hard,
which is still pretty famous.
Well, I just did that to sort of highlight that it's extremely difficult. I think what you're talking about is how to make sincerity funny, and it's one of the hardest things to do, especially in our irony-poisoned fucking world that we live in right now, where it's so uncool to believe in anything publicly on the internet because you can be taken down. And I get that. I get the instinct to troll. I have that in me. I'm trolling Joe Manchin right now. I think he deserves it because he's a rich, powerful person who is holding Americans' working class hostage. But I understand that instinct, it overflows. So my point with that is you're really asking me, how do you be sincere and funny? I find it to be difficult, and you can't always pull it off. and being able to kind of have that instinct of when to make the joke and when to be serious. It's important on podcasts. I mean, dude, that's important in your everyday life. You know what I mean? Have you ever caught yourself where you made a joke where you shouldn't have? You know, and then people are like, everyone gets over it. But my point with that is, it's tough. It's tough to toe that line. There are times where I'm like, I just want to be funny. I want to not care, but it just isn't my personality. I have friends in the comedy world who are like that, and it does seem easier on them. But honestly, it seems easier on them in general. Like, if you could just be a person who doesn't give a shit, your life is just gonna be better. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be easier to be a comedian, father, husband, human. Like, it would all be easier.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess the transitioning question from that, or the thing I want to build on. So obviously, like, everything right now in 2021 is scrutinized to the point of, like, no return. It's insane. And I don't know why you're laughing.
Are we about to talk about cancel culture?
Obviously everything is scrutinized to the, and you being a comedian, some of the time, controversial topics are the funniest topics. Mm-hmm. How do you go about that? I worry all the time. Like, I have to be careful saying something. I don't want to get canceled, like, jokingly, but like, it is also possible. So how do you tiptoe that?
I do think it's possible. For me, if I got canceled, it would be because I had built a fan base who cared very much about a thing that I, went the wrong direction on or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then I would have to apologize and get them back or make a new fan base. For people who are big famous, where like, look, I'm going to be honest. I didn't give a shit about cancel culture until they came for Shia LaBeouf. And I looked dude, this man almost brought jorts back. Like, we were so close to getting jean shorts back, and I look great in jean shorts. But I read what he was accused of, and I was like, no, I mean, that's fucking horrible. Like, if he loses his jobs and people don't want to work with him because he's dangerous, I totally get that. But then there's like the flip side of that. Have you guys ever had someone get canceled that you already hated?
Yeah.
That's so great. There's nothing.
Yeah, that's a good feeling.
Oh,
yeah.
So you're like, man, I didn't know Elvis Costello was racist, but I knew I hated him, so I feel like I was right. Like, I feel like I just got it out. See, I told you that he was racist. I didn't.
Confirmation bias. There you go.
I think that cancel culture. There's a clip of Bill Burr on Bill Maher where Maher is trying to get him to complain about. He's like, these kids, you can't even do college campuses. Do you even do colleges anymore, Bill? And Burr's like, just fuck them. Let them write their blog. Who gives a fuck? You know what it is? You wait 3 days. After 3 days, if anyone's still talking about it, then maybe you apologize. Let me say it my way with a little bit, I hope, more sincerity, but less funnier than Bill. Going back to that thing. Less funny than Bill Burr, but with a little bit more sincerity. Do you feel bad? Not because you got caught or whatever, but like because you hadn't thought of what you said in the way that someone is now asking you to think of it. And now that you think of it that way, you kind of go, and if you do, apologize. If you don't and you disagree with them, just let it go away. I cannot think of a single person who has lost a job because of something they said or did other than Colin Kaepernick. I'm not saying that they don't exist. I'm not saying these little Ben Shapiro stands can't. Excuse me. Actually, there might be someone who has. I'm not saying that it's not out there. For the most part, people are like, well, Louis C.K. And I'm like, he got accused of crimes. Those are crimes. Like, maybe he didn't do them, but I mean, he said he did. So I think we all know now he did.
Yeah.
So I think it gets overblown. I really do. I think it's mostly mad old men like, these kids won't let me joke about. Well, then do it anyway. Like Shane Gillis, there's one. Shane Gillis did get fired from his job for something that he said. Shane Gillis has hundreds of thousands of fans now. He's famous because he got canceled. So my feeling on it, and I haven't parsed this out because I'm being serious. I did not give a shit about this until the last month or two. And so many people wanted to ask me my opinion on it. I was like, well, I guess I should think more deeply about it. My honest thought is the internet has given us all a voice. And now we see the masses have the ability to speak their mind together. That will lead us to some problems. and we will have to address them when those problems come up. We will have to decide if I was gonna what's that dude's Army Hammer.
Yeah.
I don't know the full details, so if I'm wrong about the details, I'm sorry. But for the sake of argument, let's say that what this dude did was he was into texting people that he wanted to drink their blood, and then he was in the rough sex, but that it was consensual.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but let's say that that's what happened. We have to decide collectively if, like, in those cases, we want to go, you know what, maybe it was none of our business how that guy fucks or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to allow the Barry Weisses of the world and the Ben Shapiros of the world, and even people I'm a fan of, like Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogans of the world, to go, I don't like that 100,000 people got on the internet and said that they hated what Aziz Ansari did, as one example. I don't give a fuck if you don't like it, Joe Rogan. I thought you were the free speech guy. I thought you were the guy who wanted everybody to have a voice. Are they not allowed to say they don't like? Does that make sense? You guys froze.
Yeah, I think you were freezing on our end too. I think I got most of it.
I think I said Joe Rogan, and fucking Google was like, no.
Spotify heard you. Spotify heard you. They're really pissed. You're trying to go after their $1 billion acquisition. No, but I do want to clarify, obviously, cancel culture, I think, has been defined multiple different ways. There are people who absolutely 100% deserve anything that comes to them, like people who are just terrible fucking people who, you finally figure out they're terrible fucking people. And that's fine. I think I shouldn't have labeled it cancel culture. I should have said more of the line of everybody wants to scrutinize everything, even if you're not canceled, right? Like you could tell a really funny joke, and I'm guilty of this too. Like I overreact sometimes to jokes, and I think that's what I meant more than cancel culture itself. Obviously the people who are getting quote unquote canceled probably deserve it. Colin Kaepernick, not so much, obviously.
Well, that's the thing. It depends on what you believe in. We all want to act like we're not hypocrites, so we'll go free speech for everybody or whatever. The truth is, so many of these people who cry about cancel culture were totally fine with Colin Kaepernick losing his job.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, we're okay with scrutiny until it comes for us or something that we don't think should have gotten canceled or scrutinized too heavily. That's a fact about all of us. Left, right, young, old, white, black. That's how human beings are. That's not cancel culture. That's culture. We do have to be careful of mobs and just like people trying to report people for clout or whatever. We just have to learn how to deal with that. We have to scrutinize the scrutiny. That's my response to it. I got a message from someone I'm pretty close with the other day because I made a joke about Myanmar, the coup. But it wasn't about Myanmar. It was about the U.S. The joke was about people copying the U.S. It was about U.S. being a beacon of hope and democracy for the world because they're doing what we do. And then someone was like, "You're making light," and I was like, "Do you know someone from there? Like, are you actually offended by this, or do you want me to know the rule?" And if you want me to know the rule, that's also fine. We have to live in a place with rules. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that I don't give a fuck about that rule. That's how I feel. That's just me. And I guess what I'm getting at is the way I look at the scrutiny of my jokes, I just have to decide if I can live with it. Like, do I think this is funny? And now that I've heard this other person's perspective, does it make me feel kind of bad? If it does, I'll apologize and or delete it. If it don't, I'm moving on with my life. I don't live on the internet. I got bills.
100%.
I think
it reminds me of just like kind of the balance that we've tried to strike with this is like we get extremely defensive about Appalachian, where we're from. Probably sometimes, I guess, to a fault, you could say, and we try not to like whitewash any of the bad parts about it, but it is easy to kind of catch yourself doing that, but then talking shit about like California. And it's like, people from California probably do the same thing, and that's what we're bitching about on our show. So it's definitely a balance.
Absolutely. And let me say that I meant when I said that I've just started thinking about this seriously in the last month because I just didn't care. Like for the last year, I've been hearing it cancel, and I'm just like, shut up. Mm-hmm. You're whining about cancel culture. They're whining about your joke. Why don't you guys just fuck and get it over with? You know, that was my much funnier take. And in the last month, I've been thinking more deeply about it, and now I'm less funny. But the last thing I'll say, like I had a joke about how dolphins rape people. And it wasn't a rape joke. It was a joke about dolphins. But someone pointed out to me that word alone, like that since most of our audience, like 60% are women, if I'm in a theater of 300 people, there's between 150 and 200 women there. Statistically, unfortunately, mind-blowingly, 40 or 50 of them have had something super fucking gnarly happen to them in terms of sexual assault and or rape. When I think about that, it's like, there was nothing wrong with my joke. I'm just going to choose not to do that to those people because I want to have a good show and I care about them. But if another comedian said, I like the joke enough that I think I can go there with it and they'll see by the end that it wasn't, I wouldn't think, well, you're a piece of shit. You know, cancel that guy. Like, that's just silly.
Yeah, it's such a weird issue to deal with, and I feel like it's the whole like idea of canceling people is just magnified by social media, and I also don't know sometimes if like I'm just seeing this on Twitter and it's not really like what people give a shit about in real life or how much of it. Saying. Yeah.
Well, and also you got to think, going back to the thing about the hands of the people, when you see Barry Weiss, or even I'll do a left one since I pick on conservatives too much, Glenn Greenwald, when you see, or Matt Taibbi, who I love, complaining about cancel culture, I'm like, bro, I can pull up some of your op-eds where the whole op-ed was that someone sucked and because of their opinion, the world should change or they should be fired. What y'all don't want is us doing your fucking job. You can kiss my ass. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's on my dick, Matt. How about that? Put that on your shirt.
I would wear the shit out of that. Yeah, I like Matt Taibbi too, but it is funny when he talks about that. Then he had like a whole thing about it was basically like fuck Robin DiAngelo, which I didn't inherently disagree with, but it was like, yeah, it is kind of, yeah, exactly. But he didn't say cancel culture, so therefore it wasn't, I think, in his mind.
Right. Barry Weiss's, half of her fucking columns back in the day were that such and such should be fired for what they said. Then she got fired for some things she said, and then she wants to call foul. Go fuck yourself.
The world we live in social media.
That's my take on it, is that we are all hypocrites, thus making us not hypocritical. Like your conservative cousin did like Colin Kaepernick getting fired and also thinks that Rosie O'Donnell getting fired was ridiculous. And the flip side of that is true too. So the fact is we just like it when people we hate get what we consider justice. That's culture. That's culture.
It's a dopamine hit, man. It's great. Like I'd love to, see someone like Ted Cruz just get absolutely like destroyed and canceled and whatever would happen to him, aside from something that can get me pinged by the FBI or something. But there is one thing I did want to bring up.
Canceled by the FBI. That's a bad cancel.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. That's a permanent cancel. That's not just deplatformed. There was one thing I wanted to bring up, before we wrap up and everything. I've been listening to your podcast, and I'd love to talk about it a little bit if you want.
WellRED or Into the Abyss?
Into the Abyss.
I would love to talk about it.
Yeah. So first of all, I used to feel slightly self-conscious for how many times I said fuck in our show because we had people who listened to it on their speakers when they had little kids. But then I started listening to it. And I was like, okay, DJ does it probably twice as much as me, so I don't feel nearly as bad.
Well, here's my thing with that. If you're listening to a Deep Space Biscuit podcast, so just so everybody out there, it's a Southern Goth comedy podcast. DJ spent some time in the pen. If you're listening to a comedian who was a former inmate in front of your kids, that's fucking on you,
How great is it? You have a former inmate and a former attorney on the same podcast.
Every
That's
other
great.
Friday, we do a live comedy show called The Church of Eat Fruit and Fuck, and it's not a cult; it's a comedy. And
that's
and
the cult you were talking about. Okay, got it.
Yep, we can. I'd love to talk about that too. DJ and I were talking on there the other night. I did some stories about my time as a public defender. The few ones that I think I can make funny, I tried them on there, and I was kind of shitting on some of my clients. And he was next, and he was like, "Buddy, are you shitting me? I would love to hear my lawyer talk shit about my ass in my face. Me in there talking about I ain't taking no goddamn deal. His ass over there like, the fuck you ain't, you dumb motherfucker." So, you know, that aspect of it is great. What I love about when we started it, my idea was give a space that has a very Appalachian twist to it to talk about darkness. Just dark shit. That was my own, like, I mean, we got into suicide by like episode 4 and suicidal thoughts, something DJ had to deal with because of PTSD and stuff.
Right.
And I was very proud of that, but I also recognized it was kind of too much for people. And we were also, so the podcast was that was what we did, but we did it kind of in character. We like created this whole world called Hollerville, and we were radio hosts, and we had fake commercials. To me. So we shifted away from that, and the culting is, for years, I have been saying that if I didn't have a conscience, what I would do is start a cult. It is by far the best way to party rock, not pay any taxes, and hang out with all your friends and do drugs legally. But obviously cults are fucking gross.
That's a strong argument for a cult, though.
Yes. So then quarantine happens, and me and DJ are talking, and I'm like, well, I've always said we could maybe do it as a bit, and we wouldn't have the danger there because everyone would know it's a joke, and there would not be any, like, rules. So we came up, I had always said that my perfect world is I just eat fruit and fuck all day. I'm so sorry to your listeners with kids. So we came up with this.
They've heard worse, don't worry.
Right. Yeah, so we started the Church of the Eat Fruit and Fuck. We are now creating a religion with our fans. They're like helping us. We're working on a Bible right now. We've got a possum god, one god who's a pork belly. Mother Mountain is a god. So it's both goofy and silly with the pork belly and all that, but it's also deep in Appalachian lore. We've got Mother Mountain as a god, and you know, some of the things that happened to Mother Mountain and made her vengeful was people coming in her cave, and you know what I mean? Like there's well, it's like what you were talking about, John. It's sincerity with the comedy, and it's a lot of fun. And our only goal with that is to show, DJ and I both very believe that everything is really just a story, especially religion.
Mm-hmm.
But for my religious folks listening to DJ and I, that doesn't take away the divinity at all. We honestly think that makes it more holy, because to us, stories are kind of all we have. Like beyond living and breathing and eating, stories are all we can give to each other. So we're creating a story. It's just centered around possums, pork bellies, eating fruit, and fucking. And some people ain't going to be into that, but it turns out a lot of people are. So yeah, join the Patreon. It's a good time.
This sounds almost like, so our listeners will remember we had Old Gods of Appalachia. This sounds like a comedic version of Old Gods of Appalachia.
Well, I would say the difference is that Old Gods is a story and it's linear, or I have linear stories. I'm a big fan of that podcast. Ours is meant to be a collaborative experience, both with our live shows, because we have them on Zoom. We don't turn people's mics off unless they're being disruptive. We have people do comedy, but then, like the other night, we had a shittiest tattoo contest on our Zoom show. So, and DJ wasn't allowed to compete in that one, you know, because he did his own while he was like, you know, in a cell. But so we have this lore we're building, but I think the difference is, I wouldn't want to offend like the Old Gods of Appalachia who sit down and they've got a beginning and end. We are more like, let's just make shit up together and see what happens. And man, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love listening. I haven't had a chance to join one of the Zooms yet, but I remember finding it because there was something we were doing where we were soliciting, like, it was when we were putting together a list of hillbilly elegy alternatives, and we started doing podcasts. And I believe it was Andi, your wife, who said, add into the Biscuit, it's some weird, funny, dark Appalachian shit. and that was I mean, I was hooked from that. And I do think that you all really do strike the balance of like having like a serious, thoughtful conversation every week, but making it funny as well. And like, I will tell you though, one of them got me like slightly freaked out because it was right after the whole Capitol insurrection thing, and I was like, I mean, I'm in Reston, so I'm like, 45 minutes away from the Capitol, but I think it was you and DJ were going back and forth, like, yeah, well, like, are you within like 6 feet of a generator? Like, do you have like, enough food to last you 6 months? Because shit's going down. And I'm sitting here walking in the woods, and I'm like, fuck. No, I was like, because like I had like family who was telling me this. I was like, I don't know if I'd buy that. And then I started hearing, I'm like, shit, should I be thinking about this? Do I need to like get a go bag ready or something?
That was a difficult one for me. That's very funny, but it's also difficult because that was DJ's paranoia and anxiety coming out on the podcast. But a lot of his paranoia and anxiety was the fact that he has a brown wife.
Really?
And he had seen some Nazi symbols crop up in the days leading up to the insurrection, like at his laundromat and stuff. He had suddenly heard people going up and down the street beside him on their four-wheelers screaming the N-word. In the black neighborhood that was like a mile from him, there had been some violence where some guys had come in and I'm not sure what happened. My point is, his paranoia was correct. Mm-hmm. But the manifestation of it, of like, I'm going to get a generator, make sure you got a go bag, Mr. Chuck and Reston. And it's like, well, how do I tell a man he shouldn't be scared? Fuck that, he should be. But I was also, as a podcast host, like, man, we got listeners who are yoga moms in San Diego. Like, they need to turn this off and go look at the ocean right now. Like, they don't need to be worried.
Yeah. Yeah, does he live? He lives in North Georgia, is that right?
Yeah, Northwest Georgia, Chickamauga.
Okay, good area. Yeah, and I don't mean to downplay that. I was legitimately like, well, should I actually be thinking about this? But it is a really interesting podcast, and I think you all do have a really, I think, unique spin on it, and it is very Appalachian. I'm wondering, have you heard from like other Appalachians, like who've like, are there ones that like join the Zoom, or is it mostly just like people, like you said, young bombs from San Diego?
No, it's both those. We got quite a few Appalachians. One of our funniest fans went to school in Boone. She lives in or near Asheville. I don't remember exactly where Leanne's from, but Western Carolina in general. Mm-hmm. I probably shouldn't say her name because I'm about to tell a hilarious story, but she gets drunk on the Zooms and she just hits on one dude over and over again, and it's so goddamn funny because the drunker she gets, the more explicit she gets. He looks a little bit like you, John, and you're her type, brother. I don't know if you're single or not, but you're her
I'm
type.
not. I'm happily married.
And buddy, she's talking about swallowing the glizzy. I don't want to get into. See, now everybody listening thinks that our shows are just about sex and possums, and I promise you, that's only like 40% of it.
That's appealing to a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, you're kind of connecting with the audience right now.
I'm sitting here wearing a possum shirt right now.
There you go. Every other Friday on Zoom, if you follow me or DJ, he's Gutter Bumpkin and I'm Drew Moore Comedy. If you follow us, you'll see that every other Friday we put out a link. It's free. We ask for donations to pay our performers. The last one we did, I told stories about being a public defender. DJ ended up telling stories about prison because I did that. We had a wonderful comedian out of Jacksonville, Florida, named Katrina Davis, told us, who did comedy for us, and it was so great because one of her stories was she had run away with a carny who was Southern, and DJ was starting to like get her in her feels, and Katrina happens to be black, and she was like, man, I ain't thought about a white boy the way I'm thinking about you in a long time. So she tells us that story. Then we had Auntie Bernice, Tanya from the Trillbillies, do a tarot reading for all of us, and she was so great and so funny.
Brilliant.
And then when we got done, we all got on there, the four of us, and interacted with people, and we had the tattoo contest, and Katrina won. The Florida girl won. No one was surprised by that.
What was the tattoo?
Hers, it was, you know how girls get guns, like right there?
Yeah.
Like on their hips. She had that, but crayons.
Oh my God, that's fucking
Yeah,
brilliant.
when she was into punk stuff, she wanted to get crayons. It was like a story, you know how you go with the tattoos. She goes and she's like, this means a lot to me. When I was younger, I was in this class, and it was like a whole thing about crayons and the color, you know. And then the guy's like, okay, yeah, we'll do that, but we're gonna put them right there, you know. She didn't say he said it that way, but in my head it was like, all right, yeah, color means a lot to you. Anyway, we're gonna put them above your pussy, girl.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect way to wrap this up.
Well, full disclosure, here's a good way to wrap it up. I have a fighting okra on my ass, which I got as like a charity thing. DJ and I were raising money for the Children's Defense Fund. We had to hit a certain number, and I'd get okra tattooed on my ass, and I have that. And so I may have actually won and just didn't want to accept that people think tattoos bad.
Feeding children.
Yeah, feeding children with your okra tattoo that you put on your ass, and then you show strangers on the internet years later.
That's a perfect encapsulation of the year that we're in, 2021. So I think that's beautiful. Whatever it takes to feed the kids. Drew, really appreciate you coming on the show. I will link to all the stuff we talked about, your podcast, your Twitter, WellRED podcast, all that, and the Liberal Redneck Manifesto, because it's a great book. Everybody should definitely read it. It's fantastic and still relevant today. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it and appreciate the work that you're doing.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. Please also link my GoFundMe to buy Joe Manchin.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, shit. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm completely serious about it, guys, and I'm not trying to get rich. I will donate every dime if I don't think I can buy Joe Manchin. But I'm going to tell y'all, if I think I can, I'm flying my ass to West Virginia. If I can get a meeting with this motherfucker, like a super PAC, I don't know. You guys probably know lawyers. However I got it.
Both our wives. We'll work on it. Yeah, I mean, he's a high price, but he's for sale.
He's high price in West Virginia. But see, I'm out here in California. I can't afford Pelosi worth of shit.
That's a great fucking point.
That's what I'm saying, man. His stock right now, I'm saying get in early because he's on the rise because he's that moderate Dem.
He's GameStop before Reddit.
That's the first and last comparison to Joe Manchin's fucking GameStop. Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks, Drew. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. See ya.